thank you for hosting this event today. It's definitely an honor to be able to join you and to be able to get out on the campaign trail. I've been coming here to the community. You know, when I first started out and announced in February of last year, this was one of the first courses that I would have an opportunity to be able to come to. So it's certainly an honor to be able to come back and join you. For those that may not know who I am, my name is Carl Brewer, and I'm a lifetime resident here in the state of Kansas, born and raised here, first generation. And then, you know, I have 4 children, 13 grandchildren, 5 great-grandchildren here. So certainly I have a huge investment in most of my children, with the exception of one, are all here, are all Kansans. And they're also being educated here in Kansas. I started out as a community activist many, many years ago, long before I got into politics, or before it was ever even considered or called politics. And that's addressing issues or helping people that were in my community. Certainly I come from a very humble beginning, and the community I came from was a very humble, very low-income community itself. But there were a lot of needs and a lot of wants, but individuals were speaking up because their voices were not being heard, and we weren't getting the response that we actually needed. So as a young kid, I had an opportunity to be able to be involved in that and was sent out to go and help because of my experience, primarily because my mother and my grandmother told me to go do it too. So the thing is that I've always been one that wanted to help others that could not help themselves, or be the voice for those that could not speak for themselves. And so I've been fortunate to be able to do that. I eventually got involved into politics and things of that nature, working out in community activities and helping out as an activist. And I started out as a sheet metal assembler at an aircraft company, was a labor representative for state labor laws for the AFL-CIO Machinists Union, and then went on and went into management for corporate America. Last year, the early part of last year, I retired from corporate America. I joined the reserves, started out at the very bottom, and before my 29th birthday, I went on and became an officer, went to officer candidate school before my 29th birthday, and had a very successful career in doing that. You know, I commanded and trained hundreds of soldiers in preparing them to go to Desert Storm and to go in to defend this country. So I've been fortunate. And I served as mayor of the city of Wichita, and was a 2-term mayor. And he's the only Democrat that's ever served 2 terms, and that was, I was elected against a very conservative individual, but that was to bring individuals, making sure that everybody had an opportunity to come to the table. So I'm honored to be able to be here today to join you, and I'm looking forward to talking to you more about how we collectively can work and we can fix Kansas together.
Hi. First I want to thank Indivisible Manhattan and the Women's March Manhattan and the K-State Young Dems for putting this together. I'm really delighted to be here. I am Laura Kelly. I am a state senator. I am a wife. I'm a mother, and I'm a very proud daughter. I grew up in a military family. By the time I was 15, we had moved 12 times all around the world. I'd lived on 3 continents. So when it came time to put down roots, Kansas was an obvious choice for my family. We came here because of the great public schools and the strong commitment to community. My daughters, both of them, got a world-class education taught by some of the best teachers I have ever known. And that is why I'm running for governor. I'm running for governor because I want every Kansas child to have the exact same opportunities to succeed that my daughters had. You know, fighting for kids has been a lifelong mission for me. From the day I got out of high school and went to New York to work with troubled teens, to the 18 years I spent with the Kansas Recreation and Park Association, traveling all over this wonderful state, working to make our communities even better. To my time in the legislature, when I have fought to create and fund early childhood and after-school programs. You know, the last 8 years have not been good to Kansas. The Sam Brownback and Jeff Collier agenda have damaged our state, dismantled it, decimated our schools, done damage to the very fabric of our communities. That needs to change. It's my plan as your governor to work on behalf of our kids and our families so that they want to stay here in this state and raise their families just like I did mine. So I ask, as as governor, I think because of the work that I've done on budget, my commitment to schools, my commitment to healthcare, make me uniquely qualified to fix the mess that we are in. And I plan to go to work on day one, bring people together. I am known for that. I'm known for my ability to work with people, regardless of whether or not I agree with them, to solve problems. I will take that quality into the governor's office. It's why I'm a Democrat state senator in a very Republican district, and it is why I will win in November.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting, and thank you to my colleagues for joining once again. My name is Michael Tappan. I started my career after college working on highway construction. I then became a police officer pursuing my dream, and I did 2 years on patrol, and then I was selected as the department's first hostage negotiator on the SWAT team. And it wasn't shortly after that I found myself at the scene of a takeover by an armed student, long before school shootings had become so prominent. The good news is we learned a lot by spending 20 hours and taking no lives and resolving everything peacefully. After that, I joined the FBI. I spent the first part of my career on the street as an agent, investigating crimes, bank robberies, violent crimes, white-collar crime, and then I did a little work on the mob up in New York City, and then I spent most of my time there on the FBI NYPD Drug Task Force. We were targeting the cocaine come into New York from Colombia, courtesy of the Medellin cartel. Ever know who the Medellin cartel's boss was at the time? Who was it? Pablo Escobar, that's right. We were pretty busy. We were doing a lot of running around, a lot of dangerous stuff. One night I found myself in an unusual circumstance. I had to make an arrest. It turned out all right, but it was one of those where it could not have turned out all right. So I was thinking about that, went home, woke up my wife who's joining me here today. By the way, this is my wife, career special educator. Woke her up in the middle of the night and said, honey, I think I'm getting into management. And that was a move I made in response to that. I entered the management ranks of the FBI, held several different positions in several different cities. I arrived here in Kansas with my family in the year 2000 as the assistant special agent in charge. Not here all that long when we were struck by 9/11. And I was at the forefront of working with law enforcement and working with the community to see us through those very troubled times. After that, I was promoted to the position of inspector in charge. In that position, I led teams that traveled around the world, and our function was to inspect our government operations, make sure they're working effectively and efficiently, that everybody and every person was producing the way they're supposed to produce, operating within budget, within compliance, and with accountability. We implemented best procedures and have expertise in ferreting out fraud, waste, and abuse of government resources. I think I know where to start if I become your governor. Upon retiring, I'm a businessman, I own 2 businesses, I'm an author of 3 books. One of my books is out there now. It is a book about how to make government and businesses work better, endorsed by 2 major players in corporate America because policies work, my theories work. I want to take my experience, leadership. I was a special agent in charge of an FBI office, commanding over 300 people, over 3 states. I want to take that experience and bring it to the governorship. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank all of you for spending a few minutes with us this afternoon as we talk about how to build a better Kansas. Because that's fundamentally what we're talking about today, which is how do we make this a better state. My name is Jim Ward. It is my honor and privilege to be the Democratic leader of the Kansas House Democrats, who have done amazing things. Your Sidney Carlin is one of the big players, as she yesterday fought to remove a cap on bonding that's hurting schools in this area. I am so proud of the folks that go to work every day in the Kansas House as Democrats, and I want you to know you have done well in your selection. I come from Wichita. I grew up in Wichita, went to Creighton University for my undergraduate, and came back to law school at Washburn. When I completed law school, I went home and became an assistant district attorney, where I had the privilege of doing anything and everything in the DA's office. from speeding tickets to murder cases. I was part of the prosecution team that used DNA evidence for the first time in Kansas. And it turned out to be a nice political story. As I moved into my house in the neighborhood I live in now, across the street was a woman who had 2 kids a little older than Zachary and Emily, my kids, and they played together. And one day she leans over to me and says, "You don't remember me, do you?" Her sister had been the victim in the case that we had used DNA for, and she again thanked me for the help I had done fighting for her sister that day. And then when the courts redo my district, I was walking in a different part of the area, and an elderly couple, Republicans, stopped me and said, "Come up." And you know the rule in campaigning, don't stay long at every door, you've got a lot to knock on. But these were such nice elderly Republicans. I spent a few minutes, and one kid, the mother, the little old lady, leans over to me and goes, "You don't remember me, do you?" And as a politician, you really hate that question. But I said, "I really don't." And she goes, "You fought for my daughter. This was the mother of the woman who had been killed in that DNA case." And why I tell that story is because that's why I got into politics. After a case, it was very common for the victim's family to hug you and say, "Thank you for fighting for my daughter and my son." And so I thought I could do more in this politics thing. And so in Wichita, we had something called Citizens Participation Organizations, which advised the city council. And so I ran for that, and it took, you got to get elected. I got 28 votes, and I won. And it was a great experience. So I ran for the city council and spent some time there where we put more cops on the street and built some ideas. What I wanted to talk to you about is cooperation and collaboration, which is what you do on local government, school boards, and what we've done in the Kansas House for the last couple of years to repeal the Brownback tax experiment. It's those skills I will take to the governor's office to help build a better Kansas. Thank you.
We have one more candidate who we understand is on his way from Topeka.
I just checked, they said he should be here by now.
He should be here by
I
now.
guess we'll go to our first.
We're hoping he's not dealing with the highway patrol right now. So we have a number of people lined up to ask the questions, and if you would introduce yourself, just state your name, and then read your question, that would be great. So we have the handheld mic. So the first person I see is Daniel Garcia.
Hi, my name is Rafael Garcia. Many students are becoming afraid to go into certain classrooms. What would you do to reinforce the idea that guns do not belong in the hands of college students on their campuses?
We'll just start here and go down this way.
Okay, I'm Carl Brewer, and through the entire campaign, this conversation has continued to come up. And as you heard me say, I had 13 children, and some of them are also college students. And the thing is that handguns have no place in college campuses or in the classroom. And I don't believe that it's important that teachers have them either. I've served as mayor of the largest city in the state of Kansas. I've seen the consequences of what can happen when you have handguns. I've seen what the consequences are because I've had one of the largest law enforcement agencies actually work for me. I've served in the military. The same weapons that we're having a discussion about that have been taking multiple lives, I've trained individuals to use those so that they can go ahead and they can defend this country. We have no place for them in our schools, and we have no place for them on our campuses. Oh, thank you. They have a place on the battlefield, and not here inside of our communities. And we need to put something in place to be able to address that issue. I know that it sounds simple, and individuals think to themselves that if we have these weapons, it's our Second Amendment right, and if we have these weapons, that we're going to save somebody else's life. But it doesn't work that way. And I know this firsthand, because I've seen the number of officers that have accidentally taken somebody else's life. And I've seen the number of law enforcement, not necessarily officers, but also other individuals that have taken someone's life. Some good people and some bad people. And it does a continuous ongoing effect. And some of those officers can't go back on the street because of that. So it's not as simple as it sounds. It has no place on our campuses. Our youth are there to get an education, and our teachers and professors are there to educate and to help and to mentor individuals. If we need something of that nature, let's get it from someplace else.
Thanks. I've always been a supporter of our Second Amendment, and I'll continue to be. But the conversation has really changed. You know, it used to be about concealed carry and the right to hunt. You know, now we're really talking about the slaughter of our children in classrooms along with their teachers. 2 years ago, I voted to ban guns on campus. I don't believe they belong here. Last year, I voted to ban guns in state hospitals and community mental health centers. This year, I voted to take guns out of the hands of domestic abusers. I also voted for, but they didn't pass, a number of amendments that would have put into place some common sense regulations, banning bump stocks, implementing a 3-day waiting period, universal background checks, and so forth. As governor, what I plan to do is to convene folks from law enforcement, from mental health, from public health, from education, parents, and students, together to come up and craft a comprehensive gun sense policy for the state of Kansas.
I mentioned in my opening remarks that long before school shootings were commonplace, unfortunately. Fast forward 25 years later, when I was especially in charge, and I took command of what was then the largest school shooting since Columbine. We had 10 people dead, teachers and students. I even get the chills now when I talk about what we all went through, not just the victims, but all the responders as well. We learned a lot from that shooting. We learned a lot, many subsequent shootings, unfortunately. And I've been called as a subject matter expert in the media when this happens. I've been on the scenes, I've been in law enforcement my entire life. To answer your question, Raphael, how do we get people to understand? It's a matter of education. The statistics clearly show, did I get your name wrong? Did I get your name wrong? No. Okay. The statistics clearly show that the presence of a weapon is an inherent danger. And if it wasn't an inherent danger, the presence wouldn't be a problem. By having a weapon, the odds of something going wrong are astronomically higher than you saving your life. You're more likely to have a tragic accident. Those are the facts. From a law enforcement perspective, we don't want to go into a situation where there are more guns, and we don't know who the target is. And for arming citizens, I gave my testimony, I submitted to the legislature where they came up with that crazy idea of arming teachers. Someone said to me, you know, Tavin, I want to have someone like you armed there. I said, no, you don't. I've been out of this business for many years. I no longer think like that. I'm not in that constant state of mind, ready to take a human life. So it's not just training, putting yourself on a range and hitting a target 7 out of 10 times under optimal conditions. It's knowing how to respond in an emergency. It's knowing how to respond in the face of danger. And that is something you need to do day in and day out. So how do we get the message? I have spoken to all my contacts in law enforcement. They're willing to work with me from day one to educate everyone, make them understand that that is not the best policy. There's a better policy out there, and we'll set that out. Thank you.
The question was, how do we change the attitudes on college campuses around guns? My answer is, you're doing it right now. Kids across this state and across this country have made their voices known, that they don't want to go into places where they could be killed for learning math. They do not want to live in a world where they have to learn how to hide and cower in corners in case there's an active shooting. You are making an incredible difference in the whole conversation. And for that, I applaud you. I have said for many years that I have supported carry and conceal when it had background checks and required training. I believe in the right to hunt. What I don't believe is guns have no place in schools, and I think there's universal support of that. They don't belong in elementary schools, they don't belong in high schools, they don't belong in colleges, they don't belong in law schools. That's a place of learning. They don't belong in churches. They don't belong in courthouses. And this is one of the places where Senator Kelly and I disagree. She voted for gagging universities and their ability to advocate against gun policies. I voted no. She voted to remove the background checks and the training in carrying conceal. I voted no. She's got 14 years of A rating. My current rating from the NRA is an F. I think that doesn't make her a bad person. It just means facts that you need to know as you make a decision about your choice for governor.
Senator Kelly, would you like to have about 30 seconds to respond?
I would, thank you very much. Representative Ward does this at every forum, gives you some of the truth and not all of the truth. The fact of the matter is I have not had an A rating from the NRA for 14 years. I lost my A rating when I voted to ban guns on campus. I just recently went through my campaign finance reports. I found out that the NRA had given me $500 in 2008. The only time they gave me any money, I have sent that money to Moms Demand Action to use to create good common sense, gun sense policy for this state. I am actually supported by Moms Demand Action as a gun sense candidate this year. So, you know, if we can't be, if we can always be challenged in past votes and not who we are today, what we believe today, it's not fair. We could do it to each other all day long. I don't think we want to have that kind of forum.
Thank you, and that's exactly what I am about to say. Please restrict your answers to your policy positions, your own ideas, and let's not talk about the other candidates. We're not here to have this kind of a debate. We're here because we want to hear what each individual candidate's ideas are and be able to make our own informed decisions about that. Thank you very much. Our next question.
Hello, my name is Jean Kloppenstein, and healthcare debate has been a big priority for many, many years. And my question is, do you support Medicaid expansion, and if so, how do you see a path toward achieving expansion of Medicaid in Kansas?
And we're going to start with Mr. Ward, please.
Thank you. First, I hope the Republicans play by those rules. I've watched Chris Kobach work, and we have to be ready to debate and defend our records as well as our positions going forward. I have introduced the first bill regarding Medicaid in this state. I have been a strong advocate for 5 years. It is the right thing to do economically. It has a huge, enormous economic impact for every community in this state in terms of making sure hospitals and clinics and doctors and providers are able to work and live in our communities across this state. It's the morally right thing to do. 150,000 Kansans will benefit from Medicaid expansion. People who work hard every day, who just happen to work for $7.25 an hour. Did you know you can live and work full-time at minimum wage and be under the poverty rate? These are the folks that we are empowering and helping with Medicaid expansion, and we should do that. I have pushed amendments, and I have pushed in committee. I have made people uncomfortable because I will not give up. The stakes are too high for our economy and for our people not to expand. Do you know, as we sit here today, we've given back $2.4 billion of health care money in this state. Now, did anybody get a Medicaid non-expansion deduction in their taxes that they filed a couple of weeks ago? No, what they did was send that money to states like New York and California and Michigan and Indiana and Arkansas that have expanded. 32 states have expanded Medicaid. As your governor, we will expand Medicaid my first year.
I imagine all of us, this platform, and probably everyone in there probably supports the Medicaid expansion. The way to get support is to educate, let everyone know what we will gather, what we will gain by expanding Medicaid. And if you vote in the right legislature, the governor won't have a problem getting it passed. So the burden is on us to get the message out there to get the right legislation in. Many governors have passed Medicaid expansion on executive order. I believe the Kansas Constitution allows it. It could be changing legislation. So I invite everyone here to support that. It's the right thing to do, but I'd rather see it done through popular understanding of how it will benefit everybody and get the legislature in there, and let's do it with one cohesive effort. Thank you.
expand Medicaid right when we first had the opportunity to do it. It is true that we have left over $2.5 billion in Washington, D.C. to be distributed to other states to help their citizens and build their economies. We got very close last year. We voted on Medicaid expansion a few times. Last year we got close, we actually passed it. And we sent it to the governor, and the governor vetoed it. And we were about 3 votes short of overriding that veto. We know what the people want. We've done polling. We know over 75% of Kansans want us to expand Medicaid. We need to be listening to them. The legislature has been listening to them. It's been the governor who has been unwilling. And I can guarantee you that the governor who is in the office currently, Jeff Collier, would veto Medicaid expansion. The legislature this year has done everything they can. The leadership in the legislature has done everything they can to protect the governor from having to make that decision to veto Medicaid expansion, because it would do him a lot of harm in this election. So next year, when we have a Democrat, when I'm your governor, you won't have to worry about a veto. We will get it passed, and we will finally bring to Kansans healthcare access for 150,000 Kansans, and we will work to keep our community hospitals open and solvent.
Well, as you heard me say earlier, that I grew up in very humble beginnings, and so I had never had an opportunity to get health care until I was an adult and I had a job. We have to have Medicaid expansion, and every single citizen deserves the right to be able to have some form of health care, whether they're in urban Kansas or rural Kansas. We have to make sure that and that's our responsibility as individuals. And so, as governor, I would be the individual that would make sure, no matter what, that we would make sure that would be a priority in making sure that every citizen has health care, from childhood to adult, from existing conditions to conditions that would create additional things that would create problems for them in their lives. I would support that, but I would make that a #1 priority to the extent that I personally would be talking to legislators and communities about what they want and what they need. I was in rural Kansas. I've traveled the entire state. And that's the exact same conversation that they're having there, where they're saying, hey, we have to have some form of health care because we don't make the money that individuals think that we make. We need to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to have health care and make that a priority. And as governor, and with me being governor, I'm going to do that. I'm going to get Republicans, I'm going to get Independents, I'm going to get Democrats to all agree that they're taking care of the priorities that's best for the people that we work for, meaning you.
So we're up to question number 3 now, and I'm going to ask Mrs. Kelly to start.
Well, I'm Christopher Renner again. One of our big concerns when we met to discuss this is how we can bring people together. So our question is, how would you reach out to Republicans to help them understand that education, affordable health care, and infrastructure expenses serve as economic development in our state and reverse the horrible economy that we're currently seeing? Thanks to Sam Brownback.
In your humble opinion. I have, for 14 years, worked with my Republican colleagues to get things done in the legislature. That's just a natural operating style that I've gotten. It's been very effective. I have worked with Republicans on all sorts of different issues: education, healthcare, transportation, the budget. That is what I do. That's what I'm known for. In my first 6 to 8 years in the legislature, it was relatively easy. We had a lot of moderate Republicans, so that was my job from the Democrat caucus, was to go across the aisle and work with them to craft good policy. Then we went through the dark years. If you remember, Sam Brownback primaried all the moderates in 2012. The Senate was left with 2 consistent moderates there. So even combining with with the Democrats. We could not create that moderate majority that we had enjoyed all of those years before. But in 2016, the voters made a difference. They came together in a whole host of places, from Johnson County to Stafford County. They elected Democrats and moderate Republicans to come in so that we now are able to forge that moderate majority again. Not enough to override a veto on Medicaid expansion, but enough to turn back the Sam Brown Act, Jeff Collier tax cuts that put our state in such a world of hurt.
I 23 years in the FBI as a Democrat. I spent my life working with Republicans and conservatives and having to have a different point of view. And it all comes down to personal relationships, number one. You have to show a willing to compromise. You can't denigrate someone else's opinion. It comes down to working with people and explaining the facts. Here is what this healthcare coverage offers. Here is what Medicaid expansion offers. Aren't we working together for the benefit of all Kansans? And you bring that exposure to the public. You offer to go out with your Republican colleagues to town halls and discuss the matter openly. And it has to be a joint effort. You have to open a hand. You have to be willing to compromise and negotiate. If we get back into our tribalism, if everyone takes their separate corners, what gets accomplished? Absolutely nothing. So it's personalities, it's working together, it's working with the facts, and it's bringing that information out to the public together. Thank you.
I represent a district in southeast Wichita that is a third Democrat, a third Republican, and a third independent. I have won 8 elections from that, 10 elections from that area. I am able to bring people to the table. I have to tell a story about Gary. Gary's a guy who lives in my district. He's a little older than I am, and he's a big fan of Chris Copa. And about twice a year during the legislative session, he calls to go through my voting record and to tell me my errors. And we spent 10 or 15 minutes on the phone, and he goes through it. About a year ago, 2 years ago, he called me, same thing. And finally he said, Jim, I'm going to surprise you now. And when a guy like Gary says he's going to surprise you, you're a little nervous. And he says, I vote for you. And I was silent for a minute, and he said, told you. And I asked him, I said, Gary, I've got to ask, why do you vote for me? I don't seem to match up with your checklist. And you know what he said? 2 things, Jim. One, you call me back, and you know I'm not going to like what you're voting on. And the second thing is that you don't bullshit me. His words. You don't try to make me think you think like I do. You tell me what the vote was about and why you did what you did. And I respect that and I vote for it. And that's the way I've worked as the minority leader, as the assistant minority leader, and as a member, which is we have Democratic priorities that are just as important as Republican priorities. And I'm willing to negotiate and make different trades and deals, but not give up our values because there's more Republicans in the House than Democrats. And that's what worked to get the tax reform repealed last year, but get mortgage deduction, child care credit deduction, medical deductions, because we held strong to get things that were Democratic priorities too. That's how I'll operate as governor. Thank you.
Mr. Brewer, we'll let you go last and then you can leave.
Well, the simple way to be able to do that is to give everybody an opportunity to be at the table and respecting each other's views, whether Republican, Democrat, or Independent. As you know, I was the former mayor of the city of Wichita, and I say this because of the fact that you certainly know that it's a very conservative, the only Democrat that has served.
Hold the bottom of it.
Hold the bottom, okay. I lost 30 seconds, so I'm at the speed reading. No, the only Democrat that has ever served 2 consecutive terms for the mayor of the city of Wichita. And during the worst recession in the history of this country, but I also served as president of the Kansas League of Municipalities and representing all of the cities in the state of Kansas. And one of the things that I did is I brought everybody to the table and got their views, whether I agreed or disagreed, but made that and took it off of the politics and the party agenda, but put it on What are the needs of the people that they represent and the people in their community and the people in the cities and the states of Kansas? And we all have the same needs, and we all have the same wants. So then we focused on how do we get there? And that's what it's all about. It's about bringing everybody together, respecting each other's views, and not saying that just because you're this particular person or that particular person or that particular race, that you're wrong. It's no, bringing everyone together, because we certainly understand that, what individuals are needing. Everyone wants a good quality of life. Everyone wants an education. Everyone wants infrastructure. And those are the things. Focus on those things and how do we go about getting it. And I've been successful. I've had largest city 2 terms and finished 8 years, was a city council member before that. And I have learned through military and through my background that the only way we can be successful is by bringing everyone to the table and working closely with everybody. And it requires a hands-on approach to be able to do that.
Good afternoon. I want to thank all of you, first of all, for being here. I've been apologizing already from yesterday and today. These are the 2 nicest days of 2018. So anyone that's taking in a political speech on a Saturday or a Sunday, I appreciate you coming out. Just a few quick things on this question of how would you work with Republicans. I think the problems are so vast facing the state of Kansas that anyone that's going to be governor has to build bridges between the Republicans and the Democrats in the legislative process. What I would say beyond that is that I think that, believe it or not, our democracy actually works pretty well in this country, and the people tend to sense when they need to change direction. Occasionally there are hiccups. Sometimes those hiccups involve help from the Russians, which is really sad. But for the most part, the people know it is right. And to the legislature's credit, the Kansas legislature got a lot better over the last 2 years. There was a major shift in the people that were elected, many more moderate Republicans and a lot more Democrats after the last election. And so we can work. I can work with that legislature to push forward democratic ideas and to push forward a more stable Kansas. I think what is important about this next election cycle is that, going back to this idea of democracy understanding what it really needs in the state of Kansas, this is a moment where we need someone that is capable of communicating the problems that we have in the state, and then rallying Kansans around the direction that we need to go. Because, as I said earlier, the task is large. We are facing an incredible amount of work to put this state back on where we want to be. And that's going to require a leader that has extraordinary communication skills and the ability to go all around the state and say, this is the path that we have to chart, and I need you, each of you around Kansas, to be with me. And that's a pretty limited skill set, because just being able to work with the legislature and get things done, although that's critically important for any governor, is not going to be enough for the next 4 years. The next 4 years really need someone that can not only work with the legislature, but then go out all over the 105 counties around the state and say, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, and this is why you need to help us. Thanks.
So we were going to give you a little extra time here because you didn't get your 3-minute introduction. So if you want to introduce yourself briefly.
And I'm actually just going to take a couple seconds, because anytime you come late, I don't think you really should get too much extra time. I'm Josh Laswati. I'm originally from Ellsworth, Kansas. I now split my time between Ellsworth, where I have a farm, and Topeka, Kansas. I was in the legislature for 7 years. I won in 2002 the first time. My district was over 2-to-1 Republican to Democrat. It was largely the very center of the state of Kansas, all of Ellsworth County, rural Saline County, and a little part of Dickinson County. In 2009, I was named to be Secretary of Agriculture in the Mark Parkinson administration. After my tenure there and the change in administrations, I became a senior advisor to the Environmental Protection Agency out of the Region 7 office. I left the EPA and became vice president of the Land Institute, a forward-thinking ag research organization just south of Salina, Kansas. And during that time, I began building my own farm back in Ellsworth County. And after 2 years there, we had grown our farm large enough that it required all of my attention. My wife and I have 4 children, Jackson, Mariner, Evelyn, and Calla, and enjoy being all around the state. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. Thank you.
So we'll move on to our 4th question.
Does this work? Okay. I wasn't sure how the microphone worked. My name is Maureen Shahan. I'm a life experienced my first Kansas earthquake. So that brings us to, what would be your policies on allowing fracking and injection wells in Kansas? And in addition, what policies will you implement to further encourage development of renewable energy and reduce fossil fuel emissions that contribute to global warming?
I think it's your turn.
Thank you. As far as fracking goes, I want to first see what the science is as to whether it is the wastewater that we're coming back into the system that's causing the earthquakes, or is it fracking itself? So I base that decision on scientific evidence that I found sound. As not a scientist, I could not make a determination. So that'd be what I want to do. Is it a process, or is it fracking itself? As far as renewable energies go, Kansas is doing pretty well. We are top producer in wind energy, top 5. We are top producer in biofuels, top 5. I think where we need to work on is in solar energy. We have incentives for the other fuels, the other wind energy. Sometimes we give away the farm, and our incentives that we've done. Lifelong tax abatements now reduced to 10 years. I think we need to review that, since we are a great source of wind energy. I don't think we need to give so many incentives to bring people in here. We'll continue on the biofuels. I want to look at the incentives for solar energy. The only incentives we have now come down to net metering, which the legislature has recently reduced the amount of incentives for people to have solar energy by making it possible they can charge more than other people, and by reducing the advantage of having. So my policy would be to focus on solar energy, bring back incentives, increase the amount of technology that we have here, the technical skills, so we can increase the production of solar panels here, and then work on a investment policy to bring more solar panels to solar farms and to individuals on the home. Thank you.
One of the most important jobs a governor has is the appointment to the Kansas Corporation Commission. Those are the people who determine the kind of energy environment we will live in. I have some criteria. First of all, I want the best people available, regardless of party. Second of all, they have to believe in science. They have to recognize that climate change is real and that men and women have a significant impact on that. And they have to be willing to stand up to the utility companies when necessary so that we can keep our rates lower. Those are my goals as your governor. How does that play into the question about fracking? Is there are serious scientific questions about this? I live in Wichita, Kansas from virtually my entire life, and I hadn't felt an earthquake until about 6 years ago. And I didn't think that was fair. That's what California gets. We get tornadoes. And so I did some investigation into it, and there is a significant body of knowledge that indicates it's directly related to fracking practices, whether it be the actual fracking or the wastewater disposal. We should ask questions, and that's what my Kansas Corporation Commission would do. The next thing I would do is protect the Flint Hills immediately. That's an area that we can agree is one of the most beautiful natural preserves in the country, and we should protect it from this kind of thing. The last piece, because I think this is an environmental question, is water policy. Well, I didn't agree with Brownback on a lot of stuff. I do think he had some good ideas on water. I would continue to push water conservation and policies that push what's going on right here at K-State, alternative crop and soil techniques that could advantage the use of water. I think those are important components of what a ward governorship would look like in environmental.
So I think that it's important to acknowledge where the induced seismicity is coming from. We have studied it, and it is largely coming from those underground injection well scenarios. And Kansas actually was the very first state to start fracking in 1947. We've been doing it for a long time. And fracking largely is all right as long as it's well regulated by state agencies that do have complete knowledge of what's going on in the field, and they're making sure that those companies are abiding by the rules that the state has set. And I think that that's maybe where the divide has happened in the state over the last few years. Arguably, though, Kansas still does far better than Oklahoma because we have put in place practices where once we begin to sense induced seismicity in an underground injection well, and if, for those of you who may not be familiar with this, that's when you pump that excess fluid that comes off of an oil well. A lot of times when you pump oil, there's a lot of saltwater brine that comes up with it. You pump that down back underground. If you pump too much of it, it just kind of lubricates those old fault lines and opens them up when they never should be. And Representative Ward is correct. The Kansas Corporation Commission is the appropriate body to be overseeing this. They do oversee it right now. And appointing the correct people to that institution helps make sure that we are watching this statewide and continue to lead as a state. On the side of renewable energy, I have largely spent the bulk of my professional career working with renewable energy. I was an early person to acknowledge climate change. I do a lot of documentaries now because I'm one of the few farmers in Kansas that will say on camera, I believe in climate change and we are causing it. And I've been excited to see what's happened with renewable energy in the state of Kansas. And I think largely our goal for the next 10 years is to stay out of its way, help to encourage its development. There are some regions in the state that need to be protected, and we've largely done that. But otherwise, it's been a great economic driver for the state of Kansas. And the state, it is now so cost competitive. If we simply get out of the way, the free market will work as it should, and we'll continue to see that develop, not only wind, but I think solar over the next 10 years, because we've seen the solar prices continue to drop rapidly, and as long as the president stays out of trade tariff wars with China, I think we'll continue to see that move in the right direction.
Well, to discuss the issue about fracking, fracking is a serious issue. We feel it all the time, and not to mention the fact it does affect our pocketbooks. I know we don't like to talk about it, but at the end of the day, when your foundation and you have issues with your homes and your buildings and companies, your insurance companies, and you know that it happened because we just recently had an earthquake, then it has to do with fracking. So we need to acknowledge the fact and say, yes, this does happen. I've had to address that issue, when I was mayor of the city of Wichita, where individuals wanted to go and get particular pieces of oil pockets that were there, and drilling, doing horizontal drilling under rivers and things of that nature. And I had to come up and stand forward and say, no, we're not going to do that. I realize it's there, but we're not going to do that. We're not going to risk our community and allow you to be able to frack. There have to be rules in place to be able to address that issue. Yes, there are some here in the state of Kansas, but we need to monitor it a lot closer because of what's happening in the state that's to the south of us. To go and start looking at what we're looking at for as renewable energy, we can't do enough renewable energy and do enough things. And as mayor, one of the things I did was work on educating everyone inside the community how they can possibly help. And that's the first start, is educating everyone how each and every one of us can play a major role in addressing renewable energy areas. Because when you start talking about solar energy, that's the reason we had bus stops that had solar lights and solar heats and things of that nature to be able to address those things. We need to take a serious look at wind energy. There are some amazing things that are happening in other countries that we can look at here, and not to mention the fact, if we start looking at solar, we start looking at wind, it's a wonderful opportunity to create an additional industry here in the state of Kansas with the skilled labor that we have here.
Well, 33 years ago, when my husband and I were deciding where we were going to put down our roots, my husband mentioned San Francisco because he had done his fellowship there and had fallen in love with that city. And I said, I won't go there. The thought of living on a fault line terrifies me. And I knew Kansas had tornadoes, but I could deal with those. You could know when they're coming. You don't know when an earthquake is coming. So another reason we chose Kansas, I forgot to mention, in addition to the great schools and sense of community. So I agree with much of what has been said up here. I think what we need to do and make sure that we do is that our regulatory agencies, whether it's the Kansas Corporation Commission or Kansas Department of Health and Environment, are staffed with the brightest and the best who will take it seriously to oversee our environmental issues across the state. I think one thing that hasn't been mentioned, I agree with everything on solar and wind and the fracking issue. One of the things that we've not talked about, but I think we really need to, and some of our cities are already working towards that, is particularly in our more urban areas, we really need to start thinking about investing in public transportation to get people out of their cars and into mass transit that allows for a reduction in carbon emissions. Now, are we New York? Are we Chicago? No, we're not. We can never have a system like that, but we can have transit systems built into our communities. We can make sure we have bike trails and lanes that allow people to use alternative forms of transportation to get to work. That will do a whole lot for our environment.
All of you, right? I'm losing track here. Question number 5.
I have 2 more questions for all of you. What is your vision for making post-secondary education affordable by helping to reduce student debt and dependency on student loans? And what initiatives would you take to help keep young people in Kansas once they graduate?
Mr. Swati, we start with you.
Okay, the question was, what can we do about making higher ed more affordable, and then also how would we help keep people in the state after they graduate? 2 things, and I actually applaud the legislature yesterday. Just yesterday, they put in a few more million for higher education, which is the first time we've done that in a long time as a state. And I do think it helps begin to go back in the right direction. But what I've said all along during this campaign is if we want to help hold tuition low at our higher ed institutions, we have to make sure we're not doing mid-year allotments, which is what the state's been doing. And that's when we get halfway or 3/4 of the way through the fiscal year as a state and realize we're out of money and have to go back to our state agencies or our higher ed institutions and say we need 3% or 4% back. It's killer. And it's particularly killer toward the end of the year when there's not a lot of time in the fiscal year to make up a 3 or 4% cut. And so our colleges and our universities end up then raising tuition based on that. So first and foremost, it's a commitment made by the governor and the legislature that when we tell our institutions of higher education, this is the amount of money you're going to get, then we hold ourselves to that, because when we fail mid-year, that's when tuition rises. To the second question of what I would do to help people in the state, as governor, I would immediately bring about a review of the incentive programs that we have in the state of Kansas to attract and retain businesses, because I think right now what we're doing is part of this border war where we're chasing jobs that are right across the state line in Missouri. We know some of those have cost us $87,000 a job to the cost to the Kansas taxpayer. I would rather invest in the businesses that are starting in the state of Kansas because those are often homegrown. They're usually entrepreneurial in nature. Those businesses often spin out of our higher ed institutions. And the one as an example I always use is Surefire Ag in Atwood, Kansas. Those are 3 K-State grads. No incentive program we could ever design would be able to attract a business to Atwood, Kansas from outside of the state. But they're there, they're growing, they're hiring, and we need to, as a state, figure out how we support those businesses.
Well, some of the things that we need to take a serious look at is, 1, create an environment where the next generation has an opportunity to be at the table to define what type of a state, what type of communities do they want. And we have not done that. And I know this because of the fact that one of the things that I learned when I was mayor of the city of Wichita is give them an opportunity to be at the table and listen to what they have and the recommendations and ideas, because they see things from a totally different lens based on the generation that you may come from. But at the end of the day, it's going to belong to them. So embrace them as to their views and as what they would like to have in their communities. That's why Wichita is the way that it is today, because I did that. I brought everyone to the table and we defined what we wanted and we worked collectively to get there. And as a policymaker and a leader of policymakers, I gave them every resource that I had to be able to assist them in being able to do that. We must do that if we're going to be successful and we're going to change the way things are here in the state of Kansas. And then secondly, when we start doing that, we can minimize the amount of investment that we're actually giving in incentives to various different businesses to get them to come. Because if we have an educated workforce and we have a skilled workforce, then we have everything that they want. They're going to come to the state of Kansas. We have to start investing in education, and we have to make education where it's affordable and not make it where it's not affordable, where 30 years from now they're still trying to pay off a student loan. Individuals that go into higher education that become doctors, lawyers, and things of that nature, if they need to be in rural Kansas, provide an opportunity. Look at those types of incentives that we're actually providing them. And if they can get them to go to those particular communities, then we're willing to waive the amount that they owe for school loans or reimburse them for that money that they've actually paid. So we have to do something a little differently, and that the only way that's going to be done is just putting together a committee and setting down, evaluating where we're at, and moving forward.
You know, we know that there is a direct correlation between the amount of state general fund money that we put into our higher education system and the cost of tuition. You know, when I first came to Kansas, when my daughters got to college age, they did go to a state university. Can't mention it because it's over there in the other place. But I was just astounded at what a bargain it was. You know, I had come from other places where tuition was incredible. In fact, you know, the universities in Kansas actually attract out-of-state students because our tuition is so affordable, even our in-state tuition. So it was there. It is no longer there. I'm very cognizant of that fact. I've got other friends whose kids are going to college now, and what they're paying is extraordinary. So we have to invest in education, you know, from early childhood, K through 12, and in higher ed. One of the things that we have done, and I think we need to build on this over the past few years, is that we've really taken a focus on career and tech education, on our technical colleges and our community colleges. And we have worked to create a system where kids are able, in high school, to actually come out with nearly 2 years' worth of college credit at a very affordable price, so that really then reduces the amount of tuition that they will end up paying over a lifetime. So I think it's important that we continue that we continue this high school through community college, through the four-year universities, in order to make education more affordable. We also need then to establish some sorts of programs that provide, well, I didn't get to the second part of your question. In terms of keeping kids here, we have the greatest outmigration of any of our neighboring states. We are losing people all the time. We really do have to reinvest in our state, reinvest in education, reinvest in transportation, the things that create jobs, the things that will keep our young people here.
When I address that question, I put on two hats, a CPA hat and my investigative hat. From a CPA perspective, if we're going to invest, we have to go with fiscal responsibility. That means having a budget, and that means sticking to the budget. That means setting priorities, whether it's education, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's healthcare. You can't keep swapping money and trying to put out every fire by moving money around. You have to set money, set your priorities, stick to it. Now, in terms of tuition, this is where my investigative hat came in. I looked at the Board of Regents that sets out tuitions, and I found their 10-year plan, what they call 2020. The plan from 2010 to 2020. It's one page of goals and objectives. And they're very laudable goals and objectives. I'm saying, I must be missing something. Where is the goal and objective of controlling tuition? And I honestly want to add one thing now. The colleges submit a plan every year, a performance plan, before they get tuition. And I pulled some of them randomly. One page of some very basic goals that they set for themselves, very laudable goals again, but not one has to do with tuition. So that's my first phone call when I'm governor. Why do we not have a plan in the Board of Regents to control the increase in tuition? Why are we not building colleges to effective and efficient best practices to start curbing the rise of tuition, to make them more cost efficient, implementing policies and procedures? I finished college in 3.5 years, and that's not because I'm a great student. It's because I took advantage of things that my college offered to allow me to do that. How much money can we save when we cut down the amount of time we're in school? To get to your next question, as Ms. Kelly said, we are losing just that age group. We have an out-migration of that age group. And we can have all these incentives, we'll pay off your loans, we'll pay off this. But what is the message we're sending to young people in this state right now? We have to change that tone. What are we telling young teachers? Hey, we're going to pay you the smallest amount of any other college, especially out in rural areas. Hey, we're going to arm you against your will. Hey, we're hostile to the LGBT community. If we send out that kind of tone, if we don't change that community, we're not going to keep those young people.
There are two pieces of data that I want to start this conversation with. One, the average college graduate in Kansas leaves school with a debt of about $27,000. The average college student in Kansas leaves with a debt of about $27,000. Second piece of data, in the next 10 years, more than 70% of the jobs that are going to be created are going to require some level of higher education. This is a critical question. And I'm going to tell you, the tuition crisis has been here for about 5 years. And it's little things as well as big. It's hiring the retired chancellor for $500,000 to advise. It's having jet airplanes and things like that make people question whether or not their dollars are being used at the higher lead to drive down tuition. I had the privilege of being at KU, I'm sorry, it's the other ones, where there's a group of kids, of about as many kids people here, were there to talk about how are you going to drive down tuition. And it has to do with the commitment by the legislature to reinvest higher ed, just like we do K-12. The second part of your question is personal for me. I have 2 children. Both of them are fabulous people. Emily Ward is my youngest, and she just got a great job in Denver, Colorado, doing exactly what she trained to do. She sits in an office that looks at the mountains every day, out her window. And I couldn't be prouder. You know what the problem is? It's in Denver, Colorado. It's not in Wichita or Manhattan or Kansas City. There are things we can do by partnering with businesses and entrepreneurs and educators to regenerate the Kansas economy so it works for everybody, not just the top 1 or 2% and keep our kids here in Kansas so I can see my grandkids.
Hi,
We'll start with Mr. Bowen.
my name is Katie Sullivan, and my question is, with the City of Manhattan's non-discrimination ordinance, sexual orientation and gender identity are protected. However, the state of Kansas does not protect people from discrimination based on their sexual orientation or gender identity, and as a result, face horrid discrimination as we recently saw with a longtime teacher in the Seneca School District. How will you work to ensure LGBTQ Kansans do not face discrimination?
For me, that's a very sensitive and serious issue. Certainly, you know that I've had to look at those types of things, discrimination, my entire life. That's unacceptable. And when you start asking about what things that we'll draw the line in the sand on, that would be it. Violating someone else's rights and discriminating against somebody else. That's unacceptable, would not be tolerated, and certainly, as a policymaker, we have to lead by example. And the only way that you can do that is put things in place so that individuals know that this is not acceptable. I learned there's conversation, a lot of conversation has been going on about how women are being treated, how African Americans are being treated, how Latinos are being treated, and whether or not they should divide family. That's not acceptable. And for those that can't speak for themselves, I can assure you as governor, I will speak on their behalf and assure that their rights will be protected and that we would get away from that type of thing. That's the goal that we want. One of the things I have learned is that when we do that, other individuals throughout this entire country, throughout this entire world, know that we have done things and what our position is on those issues. That means that we embrace and we welcome people here, and they're wanted here, and their opinions are important to us, and they are important. And that's the type of environment we want to have here in the state of Kansas. And as governor of the state of Kansas, with Carl being the governor, that's what you'll actually have. And we'll certainly be working and putting things in place to protect the LGBT community at the state level also.
You know, I've been a state senator for 14 years. In 2005, my first session, my very first vote was on the issue of whether or not to put banning gay marriage in the Constitution. I voted no. If we remember, it passed overwhelmingly in the state of Kansas. Then, fortunately, the courts have ruled it unconstitutional, and that ban no longer exists, though it does remain on the books in Kansas. So I've been there from the very beginning. When I become governor, one of the very first things that I will do will be to reinstate the executive order that Governor Sebelius put in place to ban discrimination against the LGBTQ community in state employment. Sam Brownback rescinded that executive order. I will put that executive order back in place, and we will stop the discrimination against that community. You know, I believe in equality for all folks. You know, I believe that women have rights, that they should be the ones determining their reproductive rights, not a room full of men. You know, I believe that people of color should not be discriminated against in any way, shape, or form, and that they should be provided the same opportunities that everybody else is. I believe in equality for all. I will listen to all voices. I will be a voice for all. I will use the bully pulpit of the governor's office to change the climate in Kansas so that it is open and welcoming to folks from everywhere.
My first experience in understanding those kind of rights and protections go back to one day as a young police officer. And I came to the scene of a skirmish, kind of a fight in the parking lot. I don't really remember what it was about. But 3 or 4 guys pointed to this one other guy, so he started, arrested him. As I kept asking what happened, it became clear to me that they were pointing at him, they were ganging up on him because he was or appeared to be gay. And that's when I started understanding how that is pure discrimination. And I didn't know who started the fight. I didn't know really what went wrong, but I knew if I arrested him, even if he did do it, what he'd be up against in that system would be a far greater punishment that was deserved for this kind of skirmish. 25 years later, when I was a special agent in charge, I set up personally civil rights advisory committees, where I invited all minority communities and religious communities to meet with me on a quarterly basis, so I heard what was going on and what we need to do to protect them. And I would do that as governor. I agree with Ms. Kelly. I would overturn that decision by Brownback and reinstate those rights. And it comes down to a tone, as I mentioned before. So when you have a government who creates these kind of executive orders that don't give rights, it sends a message out to everyone else, just like the dog whistle getting out of the White House now. I'd work with the law enforcement community. I would push for hate crime legislation in this state. It just gives us another avenue for going after those who violate people's rights. It's a comprehensive approach, and I would also try to work with the Board of Education to get this type of education within the public schools. We all know it starts at a very young age when they get the wrong message. And we know kids will play with anybody. When they get that message, we see the bullying. If we don't stop it at that level, it continues on. So it's a comprehensive approach. I did it in law enforcement, and I will do it as a governor.
When I was a DA, we had a trial once. I was the prosecutor. And it was 2 men who had been engaged in a relationship for a couple of years, and when they broke up, one had cut the other one several times. There was no factual dispute. We went through the trial, gave it to the jury, and I lost. Now, when you're a DA, I won hundreds of cases. I can tell you every one of the 5 I lost. And this one sticks out. Because I went up to the jury foreman afterwards. No, I was sitting at my desk, I was sitting at my table like we were here and just kind of shaking my head. And the foreman came up to me and patted me on the shoulder and said, "Don't worry about it. It's just a couple of gay guys." And we don't turn that around immediately. We have made enormous progress, but there is so much more left to do. I too would reverse the Brownback repeal of we would put it back in regulation that there's no discrimination regardless of who you love. But we need to go farther than that. We need to put it in the law books so it doesn't matter who the governor is. It will be illegal in Kansas to discriminate against people because of who they love. And at another level, we are 2.9 million people. We are competing across the world with Chinese and Japanese and British. We cannot waste anybody. We can no longer play the old game of, well, you can't play because you're a girl, or you can't play because you're color of your skin, or how you believe in God, or who you love. We can only move our economy forward to work for everybody when all of us have a role, all of us are respected, all of us have a job to build Kansas a better place to live.
The actual marriage amendment, not the discriminatory provision, the marriage amendment was actually first brought up in 2004, and there were those of us that decided late in the session to help sink that amendment. We killed it. There are some in this room, in fact, that helped do that. Not a lot of people that did that came back. There were a lot of people that either retired or lost after that fight. And then, as Senator Kelly mentioned, it came back in 2005. They passed it overwhelmingly against us, that fought against it even then again. And it went to the vote of the people and passed by a large margin. But I do have to kind of say it's nice to hear. I'm not at all surprised. We're all Democrats here. I'm absolutely not at all surprised that everyone supports standing against discrimination. But I will say, in terms of how this campaign's gone, I was the first one to say, I think it was down in Pittsburgh when someone said, well, what would you do on day one as governor? And I was the first one to say, you know what, I'm rolling back. I'm putting back in the civil protections on LGBT state employees, what Governor Sebelius had in place and what Governor Brownback took off. And I said, I'm doing it, one, because it's the right thing to do, but two, because, again, going back to your question, how do we attract and retain our young people in this state? We have a real perception problem right now. People see us as going backwards or going downhill, and we need something that can send an immediate message that the state that thought to be a free state is back. The state that gave women the right to vote long before the rest of the country is back. The state that, as Brown versus Board of Education, is back. And this is something that we can do that sends an immediate message to all of Kansas and the rest of the country that there is clearly a new administration in Topeka, and we are going to push hard on expanding rights rather than contracting. And that's something that we can do right away. I agree with Representative Ward. It should ultimately be ensconced in the law. But it's a day one action that we can do. Because I have to tell you, I helped marry my sisters-in-law in Chicago in 2012. They would love to come back. They even get nervous about visiting because they have 2 young sons, and they're worried about how we treat them here. We must do better as a state.
Another question? And we'll start with you're the next. I lost her actually.
Okay. This next question, of course, involves quality of life and the economy of Kansas. What policies would you implement to encourage the creation of new jobs? And secondly, in addition to that, what would you do to ensure that those new jobs provide individuals are paid a living wage for their labor? For example, a single mother with 2 children needs to earn about $27 an hour to afford rent, utilities, and food in Manhattan, and the current minimum wage and the federal minimum wage is $7.25.
Thank you. Well, the first thing I would do, I did last year, is I would vote to overturn the Brownback-Collier tax experiment. The tax plan that they put into place devastated our economy. We have contracted as a state. We have the lowest growth rate of any state around us in most of the states in the union. So we did the very first thing that we needed to do. The other thing that we need to do is to invest in our schools. You know, schools are one of the biggest economic drivers in any state, and we have de-invested in those. We need to reverse that, and that will help our economy grow. The other thing we need to do is to reinvest in our infrastructure. Over the past years, we have completely eliminated highway funding for our roads and our bridges. We have swept all of that to pay the bills created by that tax plan. We need to put that back in. It's not just roads. It's the number of jobs that are created by the very forward-looking highway transportation plans that Kansas put into place 30 years ago. They were predicted to increase jobs in the state of Kansas by 175,000. We need to put those kinds of things back in place. The other thing that our governor did was he basically dismantled the Kansas Bioscience Authority. Now, for those of you who don't know that, That's what took Kansas from off the radar in biosciences to the 5th fastest growing. It's why you have the Kansas, the National BioAgri Defense Facility here, because of the Kansas Bioscience Authority. We need to put entities like that back together so that we can reinvest in our state and grow.
For the last week or so, I've had this conversation with two big people in private industry. One is an entrepreneur who's brought businesses to Kansas, who knows brand. Another was a CFO of a Fortune 100 company. And one thing they discussed, which every business person will tell you, is it must have where you're located, strong business environment, favorable to business. We all know infrastructure, taxes, but it also must have an environment friendly to families. We want to bring in young families. We've already discussed that. If we're not spending money on education, we're hostile to certain groups. No one's going to bring their business in. So there's a number of factors that we have to change. I recently read an analysis that Harvey County did a couple of years ago. It did what's called a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Because one of the things everybody looks for, these companies, besides the business environment, is there a market? They do not rely on, I'm going to build it, they will come. There has to be a market that's going to buy their products or their services. So you reverse that theory and you go to a county or community and you analyze, what is our market? What can we offer that would make sense? In this particular case, they outsourced this study, which I have a little problem with outsourcing, but they outsourced the study and they identify several factors. One, you're missing recreational activities, cultural activities that will bring in young families. Your location, you can be a transportation hub. 3, your ties to the aviation industry. Perhaps you should consider the drone industry. Now that's pretty specific. So we have to come up with the right type of industry and then encourage local entrepreneurs. Not go out of state and try to bring in these businesses. Why not invest in our local entrepreneurs and give them incentives to work here? And then you open up a center of business where you bring in other incubator businesses, businesses that have a symbiotic relationship and they build on each other. So now you have force multipliers. You have better scales of economy and you build upon each other. So you have to create the environment, create the opportunity, and do it locally. And if we're going to give incentives, let's not give tax incentives to businesses so we lose our revenue. Let's give them incentives to give better health coverage to their employees so we're helping our own residents right here in Kansas.
When I was on the city council, we were very aggressive in trying to keep and grow jobs in Wichita. And we would have meetings with businesses that were looking at expanding or coming into Wichita. And we would be schmoozing them and trying to get them to pick Wichita and Sedgwick County. And we had opportunities to talk to the people who make those decisions on where they go. And I would ask, what are the factors? What do you really look for in a community when you decide to expand your business or to plant yourself into a new place? And there were 3 answers that came back almost every time. 1, what's the educational system like in the community? That's where our kids or our workers' kids are going to go. 2, how safe are your streets? 3, what are the cultural amenities of your community? What's your art like? What's your theater like? What's your entertainment venue like? And those are the kinds of things that we don't do enough about. Those are the things that I think we need to invest in. Schools, safety, and a quality of life that's more, and it has to do with the question we just answered. We can't waste people. We can't have an idea that you can discriminate against people if you call it religion. Well, I believe in strong religious values. You can't use those kinds of tools. It is a disincentive to use Kansas as a place to locate. You have to send the message every day you're open for business. And that's how I would run the state. And the last piece I want to talk about before I give it to Mike is our Department of Commerce has been run like a piggy bank for the governor the last 8 years. We need to put it back to work advocating for us every day, trying to grow our economy, bring businesses here, and grow our local businesses. And that's who my Secretary of Commerce would be.
I will make a quick comment about workforce development. I've spoken to several employers this last year. One of them, in fact, said he had his biggest year on record last year, but he could have been 30% larger. He could not find the workers. And so workforce development is huge. A part of that is the state fully funding its technical colleges and its community colleges, which we need to do. but I also think it builds into what I talked about earlier, playing to our strengths as a state of Kansas in terms of building the jobs that we are likely to get here in the state of Kansas. Our economy is largely a natural resource economy, the very same sort of economy that brought people here in the first place 150 years ago. We are a natural resource-based economy. Because of that, most entrepreneurial activity is largely going to spin out of those areas. We need to be making the appropriate investments in our Regents institutions to make sure they have the capacity to spin those jobs out. But then we also need to be looking for those businesses to help get them started and help them build so that when they plant themselves in a smaller community or a larger community, they have whatever requirements they need from the state to be able to grow. And I go back again, at Surefire Ag, I didn't get to explain it to you. They are a group of very technical computer engineers that build fertilizer applications for the back ends of drills and planters. It is straight out of the ag economy, and you can find an employer like that all across the state. But they need the state support if they're going to get started. And then finally, the last thing about building solid jobs for Kansans in the future. We have regions of the state where we have absurdly low employment rates, and we need workers. And this goes back to the question of immigration. We must be an open state for people to want to come here and work, particularly in the Western Third, where agriculture is so important. It's a huge part of our economy. Many of those employers need workers right now. And it's important and incumbent upon us as the state to make sure that we are not providing rhetoric that would turn anyone else away.
You know, one of the things I've done is made growing our economy a high priority. I did it when I was president of the Kansas League of Municipalities, when I represented all the cities in the state of Kansas. I did it in the National League of Cities in trying to help other communities in other states. But what these guys, each and every one of them told you is absolutely true, collectively, because that is a large ask. And we have to work aggressively, but we need to take a really close look at diversifying what we actually have. We must have an educated, we must have a skilled, because you can't have a skilled unless you have an educated. Invest in all of those. But the other portion is, we definitely need to turn back the brown bag tax plan. I've traveled the entire state from the east to the west, to the north to the south, and everyone and all of the businesses say, in some cases, yes, it helped me, but I don't think it was a good decision. And some said, well, it helped me, but not like I thought it was. You know, we need to put it back to where it was at so that we can get ourselves back in black. So we need to make that a priority. Just recently, I was at the Kansas World Trade Center and was busy talking to them. There were several hundred small businesses that were actually there. And they were talking about the opportunity as we start working on emphasizing on exporting the goods that we have here in Kansas, which we primarily focus on our agriculture and also our manufacturing. Small businesses have goods that are needed in other countries. Let's go and let's work on educating them and then being able to, as policymakers, open those doors and allow them to be able to do that. It doesn't have to be a multi-billion-dollar corporation. It doesn't have to be a billion-dollar corporation. It can be the ones that really drive the economy around here, and those are our small businesses and those individuals, those mom and pop organizations. Let's work on educating them and how they can export their goods. That's how we actually generate additional revenue, and that's how we actually grow jobs, and that's how we set the tone of who we are here in the state of Kansas.
Another question?
Hello again. This question is similar to my last and also very close to my heart. What are your thoughts on making adoption more accessible and making sure adoption rights are never taken away from same-sex couples?
If that proposed bill passes, the governor signs off on it, I imagine the ACLU will have that report before any one of us sitting at the governor's desk, and I hope that happens. That is one of the most impressive discriminatory bills I can imagine. On my team are a couple of Republicans who crossed over, but that issue came up. And someone said, he asked me, why don't we have our rights to put adoption where we want it? And I had to explain that no one is withholding your rights. You can choose to live however you want to live. You can disapprove of anything you want to disapprove of. You want to waste your time doing that. And if someone wants to make a private adoption, and they can do that. But we explained that when you're an adoption agency, you are working on behalf of the state or with state funds. You do not have the right to discriminate. If you don't want to be an adoption agent of the state, you don't have to be. No one's forcing you to do that. But if you do, you must play by the rules. Just like if you're a county clerk, if you don't want to sign off on everybody's marriage certificate, we'll find you another job. I don't mean in a punitive way, we'll find you another job. It's, in the same place, same position, different position, same pay grade. You cannot pick and choose to who you want to provide services. I would veto any bill that was discriminatory like that. I would, again, work across the lines to hope a bill like that never comes to my desk. And we have to, again, work with the community, let any legislature know who's planning on doing that. We don't approve. It's discriminatory. It is not the way we use public funds. It is not the message we want to send everybody else out in the world. Again, it goes back to what kind of environment do we have in Kansas, and maybe that is why we're losing so much in the workforce, especially in the workforce, is a message we are sending. Thank you.
This question really started a couple, 4 years ago, about a same-sex couple in Wichita, 2 women who had been raising an infant whose family went through a crisis and lost their ability to be parents because of their actions. And this couple had raised this little girl for 2 or 3 years, and it was now time for adoption. The Department of Families and Children ripped the child away from this same-sex couple and put her up in Topeka, if you remember, with that city council member who had like 25 foster kids. It turns out was inappropriate. When I read that in the paper, I said we can do better in Kansas. So I went, the only tool I had available at that time was to do a post audit, which is a fancy government word, is to find out how systemic this problem was in our DCF. So I went to the post audit, and at first they kind of looked at me like, no. But I continued to push, I never did get the audit. But we put enough public scrutiny on what was going on that I think we changed policy. And the current secretary, my verdict's out on her, but she at least put in the rules that discrimination would not be used in determining foster placement. But then she came out in support of the bill that said you could discriminate in adoptions if you called it religion. And that's a problem, and we're going to continue to fight. What other things can we do? I'm opposed to the bill, okay? I fight hard, and I'm working with the advocates to prevent it from coming to the floor. I supported and fought hard to prevent DCF from doing this. There are other little things, like for example, in this state, you can't mark down that you are a same-sex couple or get a birth certificate change. If you're transgender, you can't get your birth certificate changed to reflect your new name as a transgender person. Those are the kinds of things that a ward administration would do to make life more comfortable for people, and that's, I think, can make a big difference in the lives of those folks.
Yes, on its face, it really is discriminatory, and I think the broader problem is the overall message that it sends, not only to people that are trying to adopt within the system here in the state of Kansas, and we would want and hope that the state would be sending the message that love is love, and that we recognize and appreciate that a loving home can have a lot of different looks to it. But the bigger and I think more dangerous thing about a state passing a discriminatory law like that is that not only to everyone that may want to adopt, but any same-sex couple that has a child or children in the state, or let's say they live close to the line in Missouri and Kansas, and they're trying to decide, should we live in Kansas or in Missouri, they're going to take that as a message that they are not welcome here, and we're going to lose people in the state. And that's what's most concerning to me. And I talk about this all the time. The state cannot afford to take on issues like that would immediately send bad messages to the rest of the country. A bathroom bill is another fine example on transgender issues. Texas is finding out about this right now. But Texas has all sorts of other tourism elements to it. Kansas struggles anyway. We don't have mountains. We don't have oceans. We struggle to attract people to this state. We should never do anything that is blatantly discriminatory, but also sends a message that we are headed in a different direction than the rest of the country. Because all it means is that we lose more good people and more good loving homes to sometimes right outside of state lines, and then sometimes all the way to a different part of the country.
Well, I get an opportunity to be able to to listen to a lot of those types of issues, you know, certainly from being a mayor, former mayor, but I still get those complaints. Where individuals, where we have issues that are going on where children, people have been shopping for children, and then the next thing you know, they have a child that has been taken from somebody else, and they've been allowed to be able to adopt this child. And so you have various different organizations such as the NAACP and places of that nature that are fighting those issues as we speak right now today. And we shouldn't have those conversations. We shouldn't have to fight. But I do believe that and we all know that there are people that should not have children, and we want those children to have a loving home, and we want them to have the quality of life that they deserve. So we have that type of responsibility. We need to go in and have a system that has some oversight on it, where individuals will behave themselves and do the right thing. I don't think anyone should be discriminated against, and they should have an opportunity to adopt a child and to be able to love that child and give them that quality of life. And regardless of what type of lifestyle that individual may have, or whether it's the LGBT community or whoever it is, or it's an African American community, or whatever it is, we shouldn't discriminate against people. And that's not acceptable. And the more things that we put in place to make sure that those are protected, then we're going to be better off. But there are a number of children, and as I always tell individuals, children are our most prized possession, and we should do everything we can possibly do to be able to assist them, to be able to help them, to make sure that they can have the quality of life that they choose to have. So certainly we should support that.
You know, that, the bill that would allow for discrimination in adoptions is really just a piece of pandering legislation, pandering to a very small special interest group in this state. I'm very disappointed that they've done that, because should that pass, it will decrease the number of adoptive homes that we have available in this state. I think most of you are fully aware that our entire child welfare system is in crisis. You know, we have kids in our foster care system, kids who need to be adopted, you know, who are going missing. We have kids dying in our child welfare system. This faith-based adoption bill is a distraction from what we ought to be really doing, which is figuring out how to fix this system to make our kids safe and to provide the services that our families need. You know, we have decimated that agency, the Department of Children and Families, and they've had very awful leadership. I was optimistic that the current leadership would do a much better job. I'm very disappointed not only in her support for the faith-based adoption, but also her support for hiring unlicensed people to do the work of social workers. You know, that's not good enough for our kids. That's not good enough for our families. We do need additional staffing in there to provide preservation services, family preservation, so that our kids don't go into the foster care system. We need them on the other end to provide reintegration system so that we can get kids into adoptive homes or back into their biological homes. I hope we can settle this issue on this faith-based adoption thing quickly so that we can turn our attention back to the needs that we really have.
We have two more questions, so it's almost to the end. Once again, I'm Christopher Renner, and my question is, what will you do to reduce the influence of dark money from groups like the NRA, the Americans for Prosperity, the American Legislative Exchange Council, and other such groups that have worked to undermine our constitutional rights in this state by enshrining the property rights of a few over the civil rights of the many?
I believe the most destructive Supreme Court decision in the last 25 years is Citizens United, that said money is speech and that there is no regulation of the amount of money that goes into political campaigns. I think the best thing we could do for our democracy today, is to repeal that decision and let people be able to stand up like we are here today and talk about what we want to see in the future of Kansas, defend our record, and talk to people one-on-one and not let money, third-party money, dominate what goes on. I'm the leader of the Democrats. I've had the privilege of working in campaigns across this state. And too often I see hard work, and I see some in this room today, hard-working people who raise money, $10, $25, $100 at a time, get washed away on election day when the third-party money sends cards out, misstating their record and doing things that hurt them. So as governor, I would use my bully pulpit to point out the third party, despite the fancy names like Americans for Prosperity. Well, I'm an American, and I believe in prosperity, and I think those people are causing destruction to our country. You know what I'm saying? Use the bully pulpit of the governor. The other thing I think that would make a big difference in our democracy is I don't think legislators should draw the lines to their districts because, let's be honest, I'd like to have only Democrats in my district. It would make it a lot easier, but you don't get as good as representation. We should have a panel, and I've voted for this in the past, of people who are independent, determine communities of interest, and put legislative districts together based on that, and I'll be able to compete in anything they draw. So I think those two things would really improve that scenario that you described in your question.
We started working on this when I got into the legislature in 2002, and another former gubernatorial candidate, the Republican Ed O'Malley, I can remember he would run amendment after amendment trying to force some of the 501c4s at the time, and they were very early, trying to force them simply to disclose where their money was coming from, and we could never get that done on the House floor. I don't want to sound pessimistic, but we have been trying for decades. And frankly, you could argue that there's been an effort made since democracy here in America to sort of control or direct the influence of money in politics. It's very difficult. The one hope that I offer is that they don't win all the time. Americans for Prosperity and then the Club for Growth started guinea pigging some of their stuff in the 2004 election cycle, the first time I ran for re-election. I beat them, and a number of other people beat them, and it's a reminder that when it comes to the ballot box, there's still only one person, one vote, and we can win, but I make this appeal to Democrats. It still comes down to the type of candidate that you have. Can you gain some excitement? Can you build some energy within the parties? Can you rally people to your cause? Because if you can't, then it is going to come down to how much money this person's spending versus how much money that person's spending. And we saw what happened at the federal level. Our own Democratic candidate spent an enormous sum of money and lost to someone that we really did not need to lose to. It was really a bad situation for the entire country, and a huge sum of money was spent. It comes down to the candidate. Can that candidate excite the base? Can that candidate reach across and get other people excited? Can that candidate communicate in a way that speaks past all of the other junk that comes through? And can that candidate take advantage of social media, not in a bad way, but in a good way to garner people to them, and in a cheaper way than trying to fight against that money? Because as Democrats, we are going to lose the money game every single year, but we can still win.
Well, certainly that's a real issue that we have here, particularly when you talk about Democrats in the state of Kansas. There's a lot. I mean, the gentleman that's in the state of Kansas, in the city of Wichita, they just recently talked about how many hundreds of millions of dollars that they were going to invest in this next campaign, the 2018 race, and that's throughout the entire United States. And they bought governor's positions. I mean, they were a strong supporter of Brown ballot. And I know this because I live a quarter of a mile from the house, and as mayor of the city of Wichita, I certainly had an opportunity to have to engage with the Americans for Prosperity and the Tea Party on a regular basis. But they can't be beat because we're Democrats. The thing that that's different about us is that we're not going to allow anything to stop us when we're passionate about it and we're determined. And we roll up our sleeves and we just work harder. And that's what we have to do. We're not going to be able to come up with enough money. I will certainly continue to work for an opportunity and look for an opportunity to be able to fix it so that we can eliminate the dark money, so they have no way to be able to influence it. And then we make our decisions at the polls and by going and talking to groups just like you. That is a true feeling and true dedication to what we actually have. So those are things that we have to be able to do that. And as governor, I will certainly always look for that opportunity to be able to do that. But in the same breath, recognizing what we are dealing with, and we work collectively to get past it. And we roll up our sleeves, and we pull together, and we send a strong message that it does not matter how many dollars that you are going to invest in my election, or this particular community, or on this particular issue. This is not what we are going to stand for, and you are not going to deny us that opportunity to have an opportunity to have a voice. We have to do that, and we can't shy away from it. That's the reason it's our responsibility to talk to everybody, register people to vote, and then talk to them about when election day is. We should make that a continuous priority.
I agree with Representative Ward. Until Citizens United is overturned, we're going to have to deal with the reality of dark money. There's just no way around it. I do not believe in unilateral disarmament. I believe that we as Democrats and moderates across the state who want to do the best thing for our state have to recognize what it is, and we have to fight back against it. Paul Davis would be our governor right now. He probably wouldn't be up here if it weren't for dark money. If you remember in the 2014 gubernatorial election, the money came in, $17 million came in the last couple of weeks to prop up Senator Roberts' race. He was losing to the independent in the race against him. $17 million, and tons of celebrities from the far right came in and held that seat for Senator Roberts. But what it also did was bring people to the polls who decided instead of sitting out the election, they'd come in and they would vote for Roberts. While they were there, and they wouldn't have been there if it hadn't been for the dark money, they pulled the lever for Sam Brownback. And that is why Paul Davis lost the race. So dark money is a bad thing, but it is a reality, and we just have to fight against it. We can win. I've been elected 4 times in a very Democrat or in a very Republican district. There are ways that Democrats can campaign, there are ways that we can get our message out, and there are ways that we can win, and we've got to do that.
Two statements made here I have to agree with. We absolutely need campaign finance reform, and we're probably not going to see it in our lifetime. I think that's the reality. But that doesn't scare me because we're in different times now. You talk about the NRA. High school students have the NRA on the run. They're attacking them personally, they're so afraid of them. That is the power of social media. That is the power we have now. So I would say stand for the truth. Let the truth fall where it may. But stand our ground. You can back any candidate here, and you can get it on social media, and you can promote the message exponentially. And when it's get down to after the primaries, when the mudslinging starts, and the false information comes up, it's up to us, it's up to you to get out the truth. Using the right tactics, using social media, using the power that we have now to speak the truth. I'm not afraid of the NRA. None of us should be. As I said, they're going to fall to the pressure from students, as will these other special interests. We stay strong, stay united, and work smart, and we'll overcome this problem.
Last question, and Josh.
Again, my name is Katie Sullivan, and this is the last question. What can state government do to mitigate the effects on Kansas farmers of the tariff war into which 45 is dragging our nation with China and the international community?
So this is a question near and dear to my heart. My principal crop that I grow, I actually have shifted. I have more acreage in sorghum than I do wheat now on my farm. And sorghum was one of the very first attacks by the Chinese in retaliation to the tariffs. It's been shocking to me, and it's been astounding to watch the Republican delegation that we have from this state try to find ways to explain how they're trying to force the current president to do something about it. Well, we had a sit-down meeting. Well, we had a luncheon. Well, we sent letters. Well, I don't care what's going on. It's clearly not having any effect on the president. And all I know is that I grow sorghum. And I'm watching my markets evaporate. And the other thing I grow outside of sorghum is soybeans, something else that they've attacked. And I don't grow, we don't raise hogs anymore, we used to. But I see and I know people that raise hogs, and I'm watching these markets evaporate. And this speaks to the broader issue of trade. Number one corn importer of U.S. corn, Mexico. Number one beef importer of U.S. beef, Japan. So when you start talking about NAFTA, when you start talking about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, when you start talking about an immediate trade war with China, all of these things hit our state. And so all the talk that I had about Surefire Ag or Great Plains Manufacturing or Landall, all of these extraordinarily successful ag manufacturing businesses, they're here in the state because the ag economy is strong. They need a powerful voice that's willing to not simply write a little letter to the president and say, oh, I wish you wouldn't do that, but use the state's bully pulpit to say, do you know what you are doing to farmers in some of the years that they've already had, some of the worst years of their lives, and you are kicking them when you are down, and we will not stand for it anymore.
I respect your passion. I know. You know, when we start talking about what's going on and what's happening and what our president's doing to us, you know, and I know you told us don't talk about anybody, but in all honesty, the guy doesn't have the slightest clue what he's doing. And I apologize, but he does. The thing is that we certainly recognize that what he's doing. We have everything that we have built up and what we've worked on. You know, he's just trashing it. We really worked hard to be able to, when I was president of Kansas League Medicinality, to sell our beef to China, to sell our beef to other countries, to sell our wheat and our grains to other places, and to also to educate them on what we actually have and how important it is and how better what we actually have. And that was one of the strategies that we have in being able to go out there and be able to do more of that, because there are more opportunities for us. And what he has done is created, you know, some real issues for us. One, destroying a lot of our industries with some of this rhetoric that he's actually coming up with. And it's not fair to us. But it's even more disappointing that our federal leaders are not taking a stance and saying, if something's wrong, something's wrong. And there's enough of that. We've had enough of that. And we have to have a governor that's going to be willing to stand up to the president and tell the president if something's right or if something's wrong. And explain to him how it's going to affect our economy, how it's going to affect our communities, how it's going to affect our families, our schools. And so sit down and explain it to him. Because I will tell you that firsthand, that was one of the conversations I had with President Obama. I explained to him how certain things were going to affect the economy of Kansas or affect our industries here in the state of Kansas when it was manufacturing. And after I was able to explain it to him how it was going to affect our families and our schools, he took the opportunity to say, okay, I understand, and I'm willing to work with you and we'll help you be able to do this. But those are the things that have to be done, is to tell them when something's wrong, to explain to them that's wrong. And we have to take a more aggressive approach in being able to take care of ourselves.
Yeah, I don't grow sorghum or anything else. Don't export anything to China. But I do understand the importance of it to our state as a whole, and particularly to our economy in our more rural areas. So I'm very concerned about it. You know, I think what we really need to do, though, is to educate our people about this issue before elections, so that when they go into the booth, they vote for people who will be concerned about them and who will carry that message back to Washington. This is where those things need to be dealt with, is in Washington, D.C. And we have been sending people to Washington for too long who do not have the best interests of Kansans in heart. They have some other special interests at heart, but not the best interests of Kansans. We have got to let our people know what's going on and what these people are really doing back there, not representing them. We need to let them know so that the next time they have the opportunity, they can vote a different way. They can vote for somebody who will have the best interests of Kansas and our communities at hand. That's how we can change that. It will be impossible if we continue to send people to Kansas, to Washington, D.C., who don't care about this state and its people.
Whenever I follow one of Josh's statements about that, it's hard for me to convince anybody who might talk that I'm from rural America. Right? So I don't try that. But the irony here is that the tariffs have affected mostly red states. And yet we have a president who just doesn't care. And I think any attempt to try to get to this man is not going to work. He's a man who cares nothing but himself. And that's reality. So here at home, it's hurting us terribly, we know that. And we have a predominantly red state. I think the job here is to educate, as we said, and try to rally the force of people like Josh, who are hurt, and put the pressure on their representatives, that if you don't vote in our best interest, we are replacing you. So I think that is the only way to get any kind of action. It will not happen in Washington. All politics is local. So let's get out of education, let's stir the pot a little bit, let's be a little devious, and I get the Reds mad at their own legislators, put pressure on them, and they will pressure the president to make a change in his best interest. If you sell it for him, and it's his best interest, then maybe something will get done.
We need to elect a Democrat in the 3rd district, which is Johnson County. We need to elect a Democrat in the 2nd district, which is Lawrence and Pittsburgh. We need to elect a Democrat in Wichita and change the people who go and represent us. Did you know that 40 to 42% of the Kansas economy is ag-related? 60,000 families in this state are on farms and ranches. And they've been, as Josh said, been on the downside for the last very sluggish commodity markets, very sluggish cattle markets, very difficult. And you go into rural communities, they're struggling with basic stuff, how to get high-speed internet. Which in Wichita, we have areas that don't have it, but that should be a goal and will be a goal of the Ward administration to build out high-speed internet across this state. It's no longer a luxury for Netflix. It is a critical component of business and agriculture. We need to reinvest in our roads and bridges so that we can empower our agriculture industry to move their goods to areas where they can. You know what? I was in several small towns where the biggest concern they have is whether or not they're going to have a grocery store. And it's hard to ship. They have a hard time getting food supplements into their grocery store because the shipping companies will only do it if you buy a certain amount, half of which would go to waste in small town Kansas. A governor committed to the rural economy would be part of the solution to get those foodstuffs to small town agriculture. What I'm saying in answer to your question is we've got to empower agriculture industry so that we are not affected by a president as disrespectful as the one we have. And it also hits the urban area because one of the places they fought back was small craft aviation. And those are the men and women who let me go to Topeka and represent them. It's a global problem. We can do more to protect the agriculture industry and empower them so they're not so much controlled by what happens in Washington.
So now we have the opportunity for closing statement. And because we're a little bit ahead of schedule, which is great, let's do 3 minutes for each person. And we'll start with Mr. Swati.
Well, thank you. The only other thing I'd say about the Ag Congress before I do my closing is we really need help from the federal government. It's not because of trade right now. We are staring at a drought-induced catastrophe in this state. And so if you're not aware of that, you need to be. My wheat crop looks horrible, and I've driven all over the state, and it looks like everybody else's. So we are in dire straits in this state, and we need rain, and we are living out the crisis of climate change right now. Anyway, thank you. I'm sorry again I was late. Sundays are important days for my family. We do church, and then we like to have Sunday dinner before I go off to anything else. And before you think that's anything really bucolic with roast beef and mashed potatoes, today happened to be zapping some leftover pizza in the microwave, and as I dashed out the door, my wife Kimberly was on our second-born Mariner because he was already a slice and a half in on cold pizza, which he likes and she thinks breaks some law of humanity. And so that's our life in a nutshell, and I share it because I grew up in a very Republican part of the state. I represented a very Republican part of the state. I have a very low threshold for my leaders, and I don't care necessarily if they're Republican or Democrat. I just don't want them to run the state into the ground. And over the last 8 years, that's exactly what's happened. And so I decided that I would not sit by any longer and potentially watch that happen again, or even worse, have someone else take the state in an even worse direction. And so we stepped forward. The other reason that we got into the race is because I believe in Kansas, and I believe in the Democratic Party, and I've watched good Democrats run statewide and lose. And a lot of times it's dark money, but they were also losing because Democrats do not compete in Western Kansas, and we've not done so for the last 10 or 12 election cycles. We've been losing 75-25 or 80-20, those margins in Western Kansas. We will not win statewide unless we have someone, and you're never going to win all of them, but you've got to at least win 10 or 15, and you've got to compete in the rest of them. And I'm sorry, I'm the only one that can do that because of, in part, where I grew up, and because of the broad network of family and people that I've built up in my professional career all across the state of Kansas. But finally, the reason that I want you to go to my website, joshuaswati.com, check out my positions, follow the campaign, contribute to the campaign, and get on board with our campaign, is because this is a generational election. And it's been mentioned before, talking about young people. Average age of farmers in the country has gone north of 57. There are many counties in the state of Kansas that have average age of above 57. I'm the only candidate up here that's below the age of 57. I'm also the only Democratic candidate that has both legislative and executive level experience in state government. You don't have to be young to be governor. But I think this election cycle, people are looking for someone different, someone young, someone with energy, and someone that can carry the message of a future for Kansas to all Kansans. I'm that candidate. Thank you.
You know, I want to thank you for hosting this event today, and I always get excited since I've been on the campaign trail. I've traveled the entire state. I've had an opportunity to talk from north to south to east to the west, and I've enjoyed it and met some wonderful people. I've met some Republicans that were Republicans because generationally, that's what they were told to do. But their views were no different than my views. Their wants and desires were no different than our wants and desires. And so they're starting to second guess why they're where they're at today. You know, I decided to run for governor for the state of Kansas because I've had an opportunity to see firsthand as being a mayor, serving in the military, and coming from corporate America, what is exactly going on. I clearly understand how the dark money is actually being funneled. I clearly understand the issues and problems that we have here in the state of Kansas. You know, we're having one of the small communities just recently had a tornado that just actually went through their town. And they're celebrating reviving that entire town in Andover. And what they had to address with and getting the state to be able to assist them on that. I understand it, and you had looking for a person. I told you in the very beginning, I had some very humble beginnings. And so it's difficult to say that you live a certain quality of life or a certain way of life, and I haven't had an opportunity to experience it. And what I have seen is most often when things get tough, people start weighing whether or not how much fight they should put into it. Or can they just back away into the shadows and be quiet and this will go away? I've seen this. And as governor, I'm not going to allow this because when things like that happen, people like yourself and like myself, we lose because we don't have representation. We're seeing that going on at the federal level today. We need someone that has a voice, that has experience in leadership, that understands how the system actually works, and will be your voice and can feel your pain and be able to represent you. We have to do this. This is an opportunity for us to be able to do this. And as I've always said, if we're not getting involved and we're not saying something, then we're okay with it. We're not okay with this. It's time for change. Let's create a different vision for the individuals of Kansas. Let's let the rest of the world know what Kansas is really like. Let's let the rest of the world know that Kansas is more like us in this room. And we're embracing individuals for their differences. We're saying that Kansas is open and want everyone to come to the state of Kansas. But we're a wonderful place to be able to live, to work, to play, to be able to raise a family. And we appreciate you coming here. I encourage you to go to Brewer for Kansas, learn more about who I am, and I ask that you, on Election Day, go to the polls, vote for Brewer for Kansas, and let's you and I change the dynamics of Kansas ourselves.
You know, you've all lived through it. We know that the past 8 years has been very hard on Kansas and on Kansans. But I think we're up to the challenge of dealing with this. You know, I've been in the trenches for those 8 years. I've seen up close and personal the damage that has been done to our state. I know what the problems are, and I've got the experience, the skill set, the temperament, and the relationships to make a difference, to get to work on day one, working with other people to solve the problems that are facing our state. You know, I came here 32 years ago with my young family. We came here because of the good jobs, the stellar schools, the top-notch universities, and that commitment to community. Those things have all been put at risk over the past 8 years. And we need to change that. If we want to rebuild our state, if we want it to be a place where young people want to stay and raise their families, we need to invest in them. You know, as governor, I will put our kids and our families first. You know, I want Kansas to be a place that they want to stay and raise their families. I want Kansas to be an innovative business destination that attracts companies. And I want Kansas to have the best schools in the nation. You know, after 8 years of turmoil, Kansas needs and wants an experienced leader who can work with others to solve the problems facing their state. I'm that person. I look forward to your support. I look forward to working with you on behalf of the state when I become your governor. Laura Kelly for Kansas.com. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to the organizers. This has been great. This has been some of the best questions we have had at any forum. Very well done, students.
When I arrived in Kansas, I had about 20 years of public service experience. And based on my career path, I was supposed to spend 2 years here and move on. When those 2 years were up, my wife and I looked at each other and said, no, we're not leaving Overland Park, Kansas. We are not going to find a better place to live, a better place to raise our children. And I only had a few years left in my career. My wife said, you go finish your career, and we'll be here when you get back, if you're lucky. Luckily, I was lucky, and they were there. And we stayed here. And we love it here, and it hurts me now to see what has happened. It hurts me when I get messages from my friends saying, what are you doing in Kansas? What's happening in Kansas? The prejudice, the inability to spend money in the right way, irresponsibility. It hurts me, and I want to change that. We are up against a force that wants to impede progress. We are up against a force that is putting their own political and personal agenda before all of yours. I came into this race very late. I was approached by some Democrats who said, look at the problems we have. Look at the problems that we've been discussing all night. As a legislator, has our government worked the way it's supposed to work? As you can tell, I'm the only non-politician on the table. They said to me, we need something different. I'm asking you, you want different? I'm going to give you something different. I spent my life jumping into the fray. I faced all sorts of obstacles and danger. I've had to make decisions on the run and do that without flinching. I've been at the front lines of managing problems, managing crises, making things work better in government. That is a skill set I've learned from the outside politics, and I want to bring it in to make this government work. Michael Tapman, and I want to be your next governor. Thank you.
I too want to add my voice to the Kansas State Democrats. Thank you very much for putting this on. You did a fabulous job, Kathleen. I appreciate all of you for spending a couple of hours on a beautiful Sunday afternoon to talk about how we make a better Kansas. People ask, why do you think Democrats, why do you think you're going to win? I say you are the reason why. The energy I feel across this state as I go all over, you realize the stakes that are in this election, that we are at a crossroads, and we are not assured. This is a state that voted for Donald Trump with 57% of the vote, but put 13 new Democrats in the Kansas House. We have not solved the problems or put away the bad policies of Brownback. Chris Kobach will probably be the Republican nominee. You know what he has said consistently across this state over the last 6 months? That the only mistake Sam Brownback made was he didn't go far enough. His education policy is as follows. Well, I got educated in a double-wide trailer behind my school. It was good enough for me. It should be good enough for the kids of Kansas today. And the last policy that really defines the stakes. Chris Kobach has said, I've got an immigration policy. What I want to do is empower law enforcement to be able to pull over people of color and look for their papers for no reason other than the color of their skin. That is the stakes that we are looking at in this election. Do we move forward and continue to build on the tax reform and the education reform? Do we make the investments in higher ed? Do we talk about the environment in a globalistic fashion? Do we take steps that empower rural Kansas to be successful? Or do we fall back into the darkness? And the question you have to ask is who has the issues and the voice and the record to go into the arena? And then the second question is, who do you think can stand up to Chris Kobach day in and day out for the 90 days from August 8th to November 6th and carry our values, our priorities, and defend our ideas as a way to build this state and make a better Kansas? My name is Jim Ward. If you want to know the details of my policies, go to kansasforward.com, because the stakes in this election could not be higher. And with that, I ask for your vote on August 7th.
Just want to thank you all for coming. Thank you to the candidates. This one, okay. Thank you guys for being here. All the candidates will be out in the hall with tables set up where we can mingle and talk about platforms and all that great stuff. So see you guys out in the hallway.